Welcome to Last Moments. Today, we're looking at impulsive people chasing world records and paying for it with their lives. From a garbage can lid racing down an ice-packed mountain at over 50 miles an hour to a competitive eater who decided to inhale shots of vodka, a world record attempt that horrified witnesses forever. It was February 16th, 2015, in the Busegi Mountains of Romania, where a green garbage can lid became the last thing a former ski resort employee would ever hold on to at 56 miles per hour. Derek Polgar was 28 years old and had been fired from his lift operating job the previous season for riding a maintenance sled down a closed slope after hours, an offense he had defended as just having fun. He had been living in a hostel in Brasov for the prior 8 months, paying for his bunk with odd jobs and occasional help from an older sister. His reputation among the hostel regulars was that of a guy who would try anything once, provided it could be filmed. That day, he had no helmet, no safety gear, and no real plan for the descent beyond hoping the footage would get him a world record. The trip up the mountain that morning was his third attempt at the same slope. According to onlookers, he had timed a practice run at roughly 45 miles per hour using a phone stopwatch and a pre-measured section of road near the bottom of the descent. It's crazy to think that he believed he could go faster. I think the lid was never intended for this, and Derek must have known that on some level. It was a flimsy green plastic bin lid, the kind used for household waste collection, with 2 lengths of rope drilled through the front edge to serve as makeshift handles. But he had already done 2 successful runs, each one faster than the last, and the onlooker teens he had invited to film for had cheered both times. He had no brakes, no steering beyond leaning his weight, and the ice was refrozen from the previous night, hard-packed, glossy, and fast. He told the teens he was going for a world record, but it's a recipe for disaster in plain sight. The teens stood near the bottom, one holding a phone camera horizontally, the other watching with his hands shoved into a jacket that was too thin for the altitude. Derek walked back up for the 3rd time. He did not look back at them. He positioned himself at the same starting point, sat down on the lid, and pushed off. The footage from the phone showed him tucking low immediately, his knees coming up toward his chest, the rope handles pulled tight in each fist. The ice was smooth and the acceleration was fast and steady, the lid rattling lightly against shallow imperfections in the frozen surface. The camera followed him as he passed the tree line where the road straightened into its final pitch section. He was moving faster than either of the previous attempts. The lid began to wobble. I believe the wobble started small, a left-right oscillation that the camera showed beginning around the midpoint of the slope. At 56 miles per hour, which investigators later estimated from the timestamps and measured road distance, a wobble does not correct itself. It compounds. The lid spun sideways, approximately 160 feet from the bottom. Derek did not fall off so much as get launched, his body separating from the plastic as the rotation threw him to the left, directly toward a concrete drainage culvert that ran parallel to the road's shoulder. The impact was not a single sound. The teens heard a hard crack first, then a wetter sound immediately after, then a long scraping that continued after Derek had already passed the culvert. His left leg twisted underneath him against the concrete edge during the spin, and the force nearly severed it below the knee, the lower leg folding outward at a joint that should not move that way, the fabric of his pants tearing open along with everything underneath. His face hit exposed rebar protruding from the culvert's damaged lip on the second bounce. The rebar entered below his right eye and exited through the roof of his mouth, causing catastrophic facial fractures and severe damage to the lower half of his face as his body continued forward. He slid another 100 feet, face down, leaving a heavy blood trail across the ice. However, he was not unconscious. The footage appeared to show him raise his head once, then lower it. Then, he stopped moving entirely. The teens immediately called emergency services and followed the dispatcher's instructions while waiting for mountain rescue. Rescue teams arrived about 47 minutes later. The coroner found that Derek died from massive blood loss caused by a severed popliteal artery, along with catastrophic facial fractures and airway compromise from the jaw avulsion. The lid was collected as evidence. Derek was pronounced dead at the scene. The video leaked onto local social media within 72 hours. Derek's mother filed a civil suit against the 2 teens for failing to stop him, arguing that their presence and encouragement constituted negligence. It was ultimately trashed. Most locals who followed the case believed the lawsuit came from grief rather than logic, since Derek had organized the stunt himself, ignored repeated warnings from hostile staff about attempting the descent in icy conditions, and had been the only adult participating in the stunt that day. I see this as a tragedy of boredom. A man who wanted to be seen so badly that he never stopped to ask what people would actually be watching. The next world record attempt is also adjacent to nature, but I'd rather die on the mountain than what this story has in it. It was November 2nd, 2016, in Ruenebac, Bolivia. A woman walked into a hut wearing a special vest and walked out on a stretcher moments later. Ilara Quispe was 34, a disillusioned ecotourism guide who had grown tired of leading wealthy tourists to waterfalls they barely looked at. She had started a small blog about extreme nature connection, posting photos of her forearms dotted with bee and wasp stings, then ant stings, then bullet ant stings. She likely believed repeated exposure built tolerance, and that endurance of pain was a form of spiritual proof. Her last post described her intention to set a new world record by enduring the longest continuous wear of a live bullet ant vest. She had no formal medical training and had dismissed previous reactions, swelling in her throat, tightness in her chest, as normal parts of the process. I saw something like this before in a TV show, where a guy did the same thing, but to venomous snakes. I could see she genuinely believed she had adapted to the venom, and that belief is what made her ignore the warning signs her own body had already sent. Local friends collected over 100 bullet ants using rubber gloves, calming them with smoke and brief submersion in an herbal brew. Ilara wove a vest from coconut leaves, leaving small holes throughout the fabric partitions. The ants, revived and agitated, were inserted into the holes with their heads facing inward. There are multiple videos of this on YouTube, actually. The same villagers had performed small rituals for generations, but only as a glove-based initiation lasting minutes, not a vest-based endurance stunt lasting hours. One older resident reportedly warned her that repeated stings could make her body react worse, not better. Ilara had asked for this specifically, telling Leo she wanted the attempt filmed from start to finish as proof of the record. She stood barefoot on the packed dirt floor of an open-walled hut near the river. Her cameraman, Leo, positioned himself 6 feet away. The morning was humid and still. The Beni River moved slowly beyond the tree line, and the air smelled of wet clay and rotting fruit. No wind moved through the hut. Leo later described the first 30 minutes as almost unbearable to watch. Ilara shouting, shaking, then screaming, then vomiting down the front of the vest while the ants remained attached. Her breathing became irregular around the 60-minute mark. She shook intermittently, her knees buckling and straightening. By 70 minutes, she had stopped screaming. She stood rigid, mouth open, eyes fixed on nothing. Several ants had already detached or stopped moving by then, though many remained embedded in the vest. I think what Leo witnessed was not endurance, but a severe medical emergency, and he had no way to know the difference. At 82 minutes, her breathing became shallow gasps, each inhalation visible in her collarbone. At 91 minutes, her pupils were fixed and dilated. She stopped moving entirely, but remained upright, leaning slightly against one of the hut's support posts, body locked in what Leo later described as a seizure-like stiffness. He called her name. She did not respond. He touched her arm, and she fell sideways with her legs partially folding beneath her. No flinch, no brace, no attempt to catch herself. Her lips were blue. Her vest remained stuck with ants still moving. Leo carried her to his truck and drove nearly 20 miles on unpaved roads to the nearest clinic. No ambulance service existed in that region. A physician pronounced her dead on arrival. The coroner's findings, in plain terms, were cardiovascular collapse caused by severe anaphylaxis after massive repeated envenomation, with contributing airway compromise from laryngeal edema. Get this. Her previous exposures had sensitized rather than protected her. Ilara was buried in a small cemetery outside Ruenebac. Several local families attended. Some residents quietly blamed the world record culture for pushing her beyond what traditional rituals were ever meant to be. Many people later argued the tragedy came from mixing spiritual traditions with reckless overconfidence and misunderstanding the actual risks of venom exposure. I think the worst part is that she likely wasn't trying to be famous. She was trying to prove something to herself, and no one around her knew how to say that the thing she was proving wasn't real. What a crazy way to go out, huh? But maybe not as crazy as the next world record attempt. It was September 11th, 2014, in a rented townhouse on the northern edge of Perth. A living room became a medical catastrophe over 37 minutes. A phone filmed everything. The sound that came out of the young man on the tilted board was not a scream, it was a wet, tearing rasp. Kaylin Ng was 22, a university dropout who had spent the previous 18 months cycling through part-time gigs at a warehouse and a fast food kitchen. His friends knew him as the guy who would try anything once sleeping in a broken fridge for a video, drinking a full bottle of hot sauce on a dare. He had no medical training. From what I've read, his reputation among a small online community was built on tolerating discomfort longer than seemed reasonable. That evening, he wanted to see how long he could delay vomiting after taking Ipecac syrup. Unaware people online had exaggerated how controllable the reflex really was. He bragged that if he could last 40 minutes without throwing up, he'd claim an unofficial online world record for resisting Ipecac-induced vomiting. He had even asked his roommate to keep the camera rolling the entire time so he could upload proof of the attempt later. Boredom is one of the most underestimated forces in these stories. Kaylin had no classes to attend, no shift that night, and the hours ahead looked like every other evening, scrolling, waiting, nothing. The Ipecac bottle had been in the medicine cabinet for months, left over from a stomach bug his roommate had. He measured roughly 1 fluid ounce, well above the label dose. His friends said that he believed more would mean more resistance, not more damage. The living room was small and unremarkable. The roommate positioned a phone on a stack of books across the room, recording. Kaylin swallowed the syrup in one long pull, lay back on the board, and began sipping baking soda water from a glass. He did slow diaphragmatic breathing, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The roommate sat on the couch, watching in silence. Minutes passed without incident. At 33 minutes, Kaylin shifted his weight and pressed a hand to his sternum. His breathing changed, shallower, more controlled. The roommate later said he noticed a sheen of sweat on Kaylin's forehead, but assumed it was effort. At 37 minutes, a violent retch tore through him. It was not a normal heave. The sound had a low, percussive quality, like something ripping. He vomited thin and yellow. Then a second heave came before he could draw breath. His throat clenched shut against it as pressure surged through his chest. This time blood splattered the board and his shirt. The roommate stood up. Kaylin made a wet, gargling noise, hand clutching his chest above the sternum. His eyes were open and wide. He tried to say something, but only a bubbling exhale came out. Then he collapsed face first onto the board, nose impacting the plywood with a dull smack. He stayed conscious but disoriented, trying weakly to push himself up before slumping back down. Over the next 20 minutes, the roommate watched swelling begin at Kaylin's neck, a soft puffiness spreading downward across his upper chest like dough rising. The skin looked wrong, crackling to the touch when the roommate later tried to roll him over. It might have been that detail, the trapped air under the skin, is what made it real for the roommate. Paramedics arrived 14 minutes later after his roommate's call. Kaylin was conscious but in shock. His breathing labored, the swelling now covering his entire chest and climbing his jaw. He died during emergency thoracotomy at a hospital 3 hours later. The coroner's report, in plain terms, was a 2.4-inch rupture in the lower esophagus caused by violent retching against a closed airway, allowing air and stomach contents to leak into the mediastinum and chest cavity. Cause of death was catastrophic, Boerhaave syndrome, with rapid mediastinal contamination, respiratory collapse, and obstructive shock. The roommate went to therapy, and I don't blame him. Kaylin's parents had his online accounts removed within a week. As I've said before, boredom turned fatal because no one told him that the threshold between uncomfortable and lethal is invisible until you cross it. That emptiness, that quiet, that open stretch of unsupervised time, it killed him as surely as the syrup did. Now our next story is as primitive as it is stupid. July 14th, 2017, on a windswept pasture in the Outer Hebrides, Scotland. I think the scariest part isn't the machine or the blindfold. It's that Santa adjusted her footing after the first miss, moved a few inches forward and right, and her friend kept recording. No one shouted, no one stopped her. Santa Kilpie was 29 years old, Finnish, and had spent 8 years touring with a small contemporary circus group until a wrist injury ended her contract. She had a reputation for precise partner acrobatics. But after the injury, she worked odd shifts at a bar and a fish processing plant. She had been chasing a comeback for months, documenting official world records and failing in her flat. She saved, for the crossbow machine. The trip to the islands was strictly for content. She told a friend she needed something dramatic to get noticed. The machine was powered by a modified compound crossbow mounted to a motorized recocking frame, rigged to fire a standard crossbow bolt every 4 seconds at roughly 145 miles per hour. Santa measured 26 feet from the release mechanism. Practice catches with eyes open yielded 6 successes out of 10. She never attempted the blindfold version once before that afternoon, which is crazy to me. How impulsive can an impulsive person get? The friend filming, a local woman she had met 2 weeks earlier, did not ask what would happen if she missed. Santa told her the worst that could happen was a pierced arm or hand. The friend believed her. Building a homemade arrow-firing machine for a blindfold challenge should have been the moment everyone walked away. But I guess desperation has a way of overriding every warning bell. That day, the machine clicked and whirred on its stand, a dark shape against the pale grass. Santa tied a black cloth over her eyes. Her friend stood 8 feet to her left, phone raised, recording. First arrow fired. It flew past Santa's left shoulder and stuck in the turf behind her. She laughed audibly, adjusted her stance slightly forward and to the right. I think that small shift in footing, just a few inches forward and right after the first miss, was the difference between a close call and a fatal wound. The friend saw it happen and said nothing. That silence was its own kind of accident. The machine reset with a mechanical whine as the recocking motor pulled the string back into place. Second arrow shoots. It struck Santa in the right pectoral, penetrating just below the collarbone. The bolt buried nearly 5 inches, severing the subclavian artery. Her body jolted. The friend heard a wet punch, then Santa's sharp exhale. The footage showed Santa reaching for the chest arrow with both hands. She wrapped her fingers around the shaft and stumbled backward in panic. As she lost balance and twisted sideways, the protruding bolt struck against her forearm and torso. The movement wrenched the shaft free from the wound. Blood immediately pulsed from the wound in rhythmic jets, spraying across the front of her shirt and onto the grass several feet away. The friend screamed. Santa dropped to her knees. Her face was confused, mouth open, eyes still blindfolded. She covered about 10 feet. Less than 1 minute from the second arrow, she stopped moving and lay face down. The nearest ambulance took 19 minutes to navigate the single-track road. Paramedics found Santa in cardiac arrest with no detectable pulse or spontaneous breathing. After assessment confirmed catastrophic blood loss and prolonged arrest, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's report stated death from exsanguination due to a completely severed subclavian artery. The bolt being forced free during her fall removed the limited pressure the shaft had been providing inside the wound, converting a survivable window into a catastrophic hemorrhage. Here's something worth remembering for anyone who ever finds themselves at a scene like this. If an object has penetrated the torso, neck, or groin, leave it exactly where it is. Do not pull it out. That object may be the only thing slowing or blocking the bleed. Santa Kilpie did not know that. Her friend did not know to shout at her to stop. The machine was later dismantled and destroyed after investigators finished documenting the scene and examining the launcher. No charges were filed. This next story is something I've actually thought of as a kid. Good thing I had no way of doing when I was a young, dumb child. However, this guy did. It was October 13th, 2018, on the cold blue surface of Lake Annecy in eastern France, where a 41-year-old man climbed into a roughly 8-foot-wide vinyl ball and began walking toward a world record. Tomáš Horvat was a Slovenian who managed a zorbing park in the Alps, a business built on rolling down hills inside giant inflatable balls. He had spent years testing equipment, training staff, and watching tourists laugh their way across grass slopes. But he wanted something bigger, a water crossing. He had modified a standard vinyl hamster ball by cutting additional air vents, believing this would prevent carbon dioxide buildup during the long walk. His plan was to walk 1.2 miles across the lake. His ex-wife and teenage daughter thought he was being reckless. If that much people advises you not to do it, I get the impulse of wanting it even more. He had completed similar but shorter water walks in smaller lakes near his home in Slovenia, always with a boat nearby. Those attempts had been successful. He convinced himself that the longer distance was just a matter of endurance, not engineering. The air vents seemed logical. More airflow meant more oxygen. I think he did not calculate how those holes might weaken the seams under sustained pressure, or allow curtain intrusion that reduced buoyancy over time. The water temperature that morning was 54 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was still. The mountains around the lake held the last colors of autumn. The support boat was a small, motorized inflatable rented from a local marina. The driver, a 28-year-old seasonal worker, said that he had never done anything like this before, but the world record aspect of it intrigued him. He had been hired for the day by Tomasz through an online ad. The boat carried a rope, a life ring, and a phone. The driver later told investigators that he felt curious, but uneasy from the start. Tomasz entered the ball from a wooden dock. He sealed the entry flap and began walking. The ball rotated slowly, its vinyl skin dimpling against the water. The first 1,000 feet went smoothly. The boat idled 50 feet behind. At roughly 2,000 feet, the driver noticed the ball seemed softer, less rigid, more wrinkled on top. He called out, but Tomasz did not hear. The driver increased throttle slightly to close the gap. At approximately 3,000 feet from shore, the driver heard a muffled pop over the sound of the outboard motor. It was not loud, but the ball immediately collapsed inward, its shape caving like a stepped-on soda can. The driver later described it as a lung deflating. Instead of staying rigid around him, the vinyl lost structure completely and folded flat across the surface of the water. Tomasz disappeared beneath the collapsing layers as lake water rushed over the sagging material. The heavy, wet vinyl tangled around his arms and shoulders, while the remaining pockets of trapped air shifted unpredictably beneath him. From the boat, the driver could see distorted movements under the flattened plastic as Tomasz struggled to find the exit flap underwater. The ball did not fully sink, but it drifted low in the water like a partially submerged tarp with air trapped inside its folds. The driver accelerated hard, reaching the ball in less than 20 seconds. By then, the arms had stopped moving. He cut the engine, grabbed a knife from his gear bag, and pulled the ball alongside the boat. He slashed the vinyl open. Tomasz floated out face up, limp, his skin bluish around the lips and darkened across the face, his eyes open. The driver dragged him into the boat by his jacket collar and began chest compressions. Tomasz's fingernails on both hands were torn back from the nail beds, with fresh blood visible beneath 3 of them. The driver later said it looked like he had clawed at the vinyl until his fingers gave out. Medics arrived by boat 12 minutes later. They continued resuscitation while towing to the shore. A medical team met them at the dock and pronounced Tomasz dead at 11:34 a.m. The coroner's report, in plain terms, stated drowning. Local authorities briefly reviewed whether the stunt had required additional lake use authorization, but no charges were filed. Tomasz's ex-wife traveled from Slovenia with their 14-year-old daughter to claim the body. She organized a small funeral in their hometown. The Zorbing Park remained open under new management. The worst part is that Tomasz probably believed the air vents made him safer. They did the opposite. They created failure points. And for our last story, we go to Europe with perhaps another instance of boredom gone bad. It was January 12th, 2018, in a cramped apartment bedroom in Oradea, Romania, where 2 young men held phones and a third sat at a folding table with a plastic straw taped to a shot glass. Cyprian Viduva was 24 years old and worked a night shift at a regional warehouse, stacking pallets. He held unofficial local records for eating 24 raw eggs in under 10 minutes and drinking a liter of sunflower oil without vomiting. He had a reputation among a small circle of amateur competitive eaters for his ability to consume nearly anything without gagging. He wanted something no one had done before, a world record involving extreme nasal alcohol intake. His only goal that night was to complete 20 shots. Cyprian believed his high tolerance from years of eating contests would protect him. As far as anyone knew, he had never failed a challenge. The nasal straw seemed clever to him, faster absorption and no stomach upset. He told his friends it would be fine. He had eaten nothing all day to keep his stomach empty, thinking that would reduce nausea. In competitive eating, an empty stomach helps. In alcohol inhalation, an empty stomach means near instantaneous absorption into the bloodstream, bypassing any metabolic defense while also increasing risk of rapid intoxication once alcohol is swallowed and absorbed normally through the digestive tract. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cooking oil from earlier challenges. One friend positioned a phone on a tripod facing the table. Another held a second phone for close-up shots. The nasal straw apparatus was a plastic tube inserted into a shot glass sealed with electrical tape. Each shot measured 0.8 fluid ounces of 40% alcohol vodka. The plan was 1 shot every 40 seconds. The first 8 shots went smoothly. Cyprian inhaled sharply through the straw, grimaced, and exhaled. Tears streamed from his eyes after each pull, which I think should have been a warning. Instead, his friends counted loudly, laughing between counts. Shot 9, he swayed in his chair. His smile became loose, unfocused. Shot 10, he slurred the count. Finally, one friend asked if he should stop, but Cyprian waved his hand and reached for the next shot. Shot 11 went wrong immediately. Cyprian inhaled and forcefully retched, producing a mixture of vomit from his mouth with liquid also spilling from his nostrils due to pressure and reflux. His breathing became irregular and then stopped. Not a cough, not a gasp, just silence. His body went limp in the chair, chest no longer rising in a coordinated pattern. Then his arms jerked. His back arched off the chair. His head snapped sideways, then back. A tonic-clonic seizure began, likely triggered by acute hypoxia and severe alcohol intoxication. The friends immediately rushed to him. The seizure lasted approximately a minute, arms flailing, legs kicking, teeth grinding. Pink foam bubbled from both nostrils and partially from his mouth, due to airway fluid mixing during respiratory failure. After the seizure, he lay still, face down on the table, pink foam spreading across the wood grain. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. Paramedics found Cyprian not breathing, but with a faint, irregular pulse. They intubated him at the scene. I imagine what his friends might be thinking at that time as they attached Cyprian to a machine. At the regional hospital, a toxicology screen estimated his blood alcohol concentration at approximately 0.29 grams per deciliter, consistent with rapid but not physically impossible absorption given combined nasal exposure, swallowing, and delayed systemic distribution. Unfortunately, he never regained consciousness. The coroner's report stated death from acute alcohol poisoning leading to respiratory arrest, followed by hypoxic brain injury. The nasal administration significantly increased rapid absorption and irritation, but did not bypass all normal metabolic pathways as a complete alternative route of intoxication. Estimated total alcohol exposure was equivalent to approximately 9 to 10 standard drinks in a short period of under 15 minutes, with no opportunity for emesis to prevent progression. Life support was removed the next day. His two friends were charged with failure to provide medical aid under Romanian law. Both received suspended sentences. I think it is unusual for bystanders to face charges. Most walk away clean, but these two counted the shots. They filmed, they watched a man seize for over a minute without dialing for help. That is not being a bystander. That is being complicit. The punishment was light, but the principle was right. If you like that video, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe. We'll see you next time.